Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Diaspora Dialogue series with LA. I am Lillian Agbeyegbe, your host on this program. We are having these conversations with members of the diaspora to understand where they were before they came into the diaspora, how coming to the diaspora has made a difference in their lives, and how they're settling and staying connected with home. This contribution to the narrative of our culture is to enrich our experiences as members of a global society. We're also trying to debunk the myth that everybody has the same story. Everybody came from because of the same reason. Everybody's integrated the same way. Everybody is doing the same profession. No, we are not all nurses, and no, we don't all work in transportation. Today, I'm talking to another phenomenal member of the diaspora, Chuks Eleonu. Chuks, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dr. Agbeyegbe. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Chuks is joining us from the DMV, that's the DC, Maryland, Virginia metropolitan area. But before Chuks came here, he was in Nigeria. So, Chuks, tell us, where were you in Nigeria before you relocated abroad, and what were you doing?
Great. So going back in history, so I was originally born in Ibadan, grew up briefly in Lagos, but most of my teenage life, high school life, I spent in Port Harcourt.
Great. And so you were in school in Port Harcourt, you had traversed Ibadan, Lagos, and you were in Port Harcourt, and then you came to the US. What was going on?
So yeah, after high school, typically back in those days, the key is, okay, which university are you going to go, Nigeria or abroad? So I happen to have been fortunate to get the opportunity to come abroad. And so I chose America since I am into technology. I've always been technologically inclined since childhood. So the natural tendency was it's either going to be Germany, Japan, or America. And when I looked at the other two countries, I needed a few years to learn their language. I'm like, no, I can speak English already, so why not go to America? And that's what I did.
Because I was going to say you chose Japan over America for technology, but then you said the language bit, so that makes sense. So you finish high school, you come to the US. What was that transition like? Did you find everything exactly as you expected it, or were they like, oh my goodness, what did I sign up for?
Actually, everything was as I expected and more or better. One of the unique things would be the nights that I was actually traveling out of Nigeria. Um, there was no electricity all day at the Murtala Mohammed Airport. It was like all day. So I kept on telling myself, does this ever happen overseas? Does this happen abroad? And so when I arrived and I was like, okay, looking at things, seeing how things were, I knew that there would definitely not be any comparison. There's only one exception. So even though I live in the DMV area now, I originally started my journey in the US in the state of Oklahoma. So now if you know the dynamics of how the US is structured, for those who know America, Oklahoma is actually not one of those states that you would consider to be cosmopolitan. So I encountered America's gun culture
Wow.
time, which in less than a year made me move actually. So, but yes, except for that issue, everything else was more than I expected.
Awesome. It's interesting that you said that experience made you move because people, again, just as you think that, everybody's coming here for the same reason, people think America is just the same. I know that originally when I moved here, if somebody says to me they're coming to the US, I'd be like, oh, I'll see you. And then they come and I'm on the East Coast and they go to California and it's like, oh no, we didn't get to see. And then they come and they go to Texas and I'm in the East Coast and we didn't get to see. So I learned the hard way that when somebody says they're coming to the US, I ask them, where are you coming to? Because just because you're in the US doesn't mean that we'll get to see because the US is a very vast land. So you moved from Oklahoma and you moved to the DMV area. How has it been for you being in the US? Are you able to pinpoint to some things and say, this is what I've been able to accomplish in the US that possibly would not have happened if I'd stayed back in Nigeria?
Yes, there are areas that I could pinpoint. One of them would be the ability to quickly interact or leverage leadership. Um, so there is that tendency in Nigeria where a wall or partitions are actually built between the upper hierarchy of any organization, be it government or corporate, between the upper echelon and the rest or the rank and file. One of the things that I can say that have learned here is that we shouldn't be too afraid of that wall. It's a very thin wall. And if you come fully prepared, or if you use Chinua Achebe's metaphor of coming with a clean hand, washing your hands properly, then you'll be invited to sit at the table. So the only caveat I would have there is making sure you have all the necessary knowledge, the necessary skills, and that you have the ability to interact with them at a level, at their own level. That wall is not as thick or as exclusionary as we tend to put it in Nigeria. So here you could almost literally walk up to Joe Biden or any of the other leadership people here and interact with them at any level.
Absolutely. So it's like, and I think that's what helps this American culture to be able to hold their leaders accountable. I know when I was working in New York, we would go to assemblymen's offices and write them and take our people there to advocate for them. And you be in their office and be in their faces and say, this policy needs to change. This is what we need to happen in our society. That's good to know that that wall is not a really a solid wall. Neither is it a necessary wall, right?
Correct. It's actually not a real wall. It's just put in there either from the fear of worshiping titles, and this is Nigeria now that I'm speaking. So it's because in Nigeria we have this culture of worshiping titles or worshiping money. So sometimes when we see either of those things, we think, oh wow, I'm not up to here, or I shouldn't even. But sometimes that's not what they're interested in. Sometimes they are actually interested in genuinely hearing your opinion or genuinely interacting with you. So yes.
Great. There's some things I don't want to seem to be like biased. I'm like, what did America do for you? But when you think back also about Nigeria, there's some things that you miss in Nigeria. If you could have the best of both worlds, is there something from Nigeria that you are like, oh, I should import this, or they should import this, or they should do this?
Yes, certainly. I actually talk about that a lot with my kids. That if there's one thing, in fact, they do ask those kind of questions. That if there's one thing that I would want to bring, I think the notion of family values, um, not the way that it's defined here in America, but the way we lived it in the villages, in the localities, in the cities back in Nigeria, that notion of family values, it is something that I would love to import. Because here there's everything is seemed to be transactional. So because of that, you often literally never get to know. You could be working with a co-worker for 15, 20 years and never really get to know where they live, or never get an invitation to hang out with them, or you invite them to your own events. So that is one area that if I could change anything, that I would. That's one area.
That is so true. When I was doing my MPH program, we had somebody who came to speak to us, and the person came to us from a homeless shelter. They had lost their job and they couldn't pay their rent, and they were in a homeless. And I was just looking at them in disbelief, because when I was growing up, there were like people and people and people and people and people in my house. And in order for you to be like homeless in Nigeria, at least at the time I was growing up, you really had to have been an enemy of everybody in your family. You could
Very,
just go to somebody from your village. They didn't even have to be related to you. You could just
very,
go for somebody in your village and you would just go and sit down in their house.
very true. And that doesn't even here when you're even siblings, it's hard to get them to even be able to be that acceptable now, because everybody have their own little silos or little cubicles that they want to isolate themselves in, and you need permission to penetrate it or be a part of it.
Yes. You mentioned earlier that your children sometimes ask that question. So I wanted to find out how has it been raising children? I presume you had your children here. How has
Yeah.
it been raising children here compared to how you were raised in Nigeria? What are some notable difference, would you say?
Good question. That's another one of their questions. So I have four kids, two girls and two boys, and exceptional kids compared to how I was raised. Um, So the biggest difference is, growing up in Nigeria, there was this notion that being firm and being rigid and being stern was the way to discipline children or to get them aligned. So I'm finding out that raising four kids here, yes, there are people who compliment me that, oh, you make parenting look so easy with the way you handle your kids. But my experience raising my kids is that we look at it from a partnership point of view. Of course, I do make sure they do understand that there are boundaries. I make sure they understand I will always be the parent and you will always be the child, regardless of your age. Because I do have a young adult now, and she every now and then wants to let me know, hey, I'm an adult. I say, yeah, you're an adult, but you're still a child. You're still my child. But we approach it from a partnership point of view. So you share this with me, and I'll share this with you, and we journey together. And if you have questions, concerns, criticisms, let's sit down and talk about it. So even though in my little house, it's a parent-child relationship, but we do have meetings. We interact. In fact, after I'm done with your interview now, to the Fridays are movie nights at my house. So the kids will be waiting. We'll all sit down. We do some little chit chat before the movie starts. So they get to ask questions. I also get to ask questions about their day. So we live in that method of dialogue and partnership. So there has never really been a draconian part to say this is the only way I can make sure you understand. Now, of course, things like iPads and phones and all that, the Xbox does get put on timeout if they don't do their own portion, if they don't rise up to the occasion, sure. But that physical, corporal punishment type things, that's the biggest difference.
And how do you see that difference of us working? So when you were growing up, you probably didn't sit and have the opportunity to ask your parents all these questions or have movie nights. Uh, do you think, because there's sometimes some people say, oh, this culture is taking away, you're not going to have the best outcome from your children. Do you see the difference that compared to how you're doing? Do you think you turned out the way you turned out because of how you were brought up, and your kids are going to turn out differently if you're raising them differently, or how do you see all of that?
To the contrary. So I will say that for me, growing up in Nigeria, um, that was what they knew. And my dad did have the pleasure of coming to live with me for the 10 years, the latter 10 years before he passed. So he lived with me here in the US for 10 years. And he did get to see the difference, right? So he saw me as a young parent, and we did go back and forth interacting about how he himself would have done those things back when I was growing up. So to their credit, our parents were raising us the best way they knew how. Did I turn out that way? No, I did not. And part of the transition I had to make involved things that I coach people today, and you that are playing this role would also be in a better place to coach others doing that. In other words, the education or knowledge we acquired back home is just the beginning, right? Because most of us were teenagers, a few of us that were not teenagers were just in our early adulthood. So by the time you crossed into full adulthood, full professionalism, graduating to becoming a parent, and some of us are now becoming grandparents, you should have also had that lifestyle of lifelong learning. That's the word I'm looking for.
Okay.
So there are some who were raised in Nigeria or any other part of Africa, and they felt that whatever my parents gave me, that's it. That's not true. As humans, we have to continue to evolve. So for me, what I did and how I learned this was by observing others, especially those that I would have loved to be in the way they were. I knew growing up at the end of at the opening of the school year, I used to have the rich kids will come and tell us all the vacations they took, all the places they went, and I'm like, I didn't get that. I was eating gare and akara and akamu every day, so there were no variety, it's one thing for the same. So I had to learn and I had to evolve and I had to look at parenting from a different lens. And I'm applying that to my children. So that gets me to the second part of your question, which how are the kids turning out today? To their credit, I've taken them to Ghana. My wife is from Ghana, and I've taken them to Nigeria. And Nigerians do come here to visit. So there are different places and different settings. In fact, we're getting ready to go to a traditional wedding next weekend where they get to see how the process of marriage works. And I can tell you that every time my kids have been around folks who actually came from home, 2 to 3 things either happens. One, they mistake their age because they assume they are much older than they truly are. 2, they find that their level of interaction for a child interacting with an adult was actually, whoa, wow, when I was growing up, I could never talk to somebody. I'm not able to carry that level of conversation. But the more important part is they are also grounded in some of the norms and some of the culture, as in the respect and understanding that elders, you treat them this way and siblings. So when you put those 3 in play, I would say that they've come out okay and much, much better than anybody would have anticipated.
Awesome, awesome. Picking up norms, coming out okay. The best of both worlds, one could almost say. Speaking about the best of both worlds, how do you, and I know you say you're going to a traditional wedding, how do you stay connected with the Nigerian community here? And how do you stay connected with the community, both Ghana and Nigeria? You go back home and stay connected with both places.
Yes, we do. I do that by making sure, and I'm trying to teach this to my kids as well, which is your profession is your profession. That's what you do. And everybody has a passion. Some are born with it and some have to go learn it. And what I try to get them to understand is that giving back to the community does not often always involve money.
That's
Sometimes it
insightful.
involves rolling up your sleeves and getting there and helping do the work. So they do see me get organized, get involved in community organizing. So with the diaspora here, and for those of us who live in the US, we happen to be blessed that the majority, the highest population of Nigerians living outside of Nigeria live in North America. So there is absolutely no shortage of Nigerian activities. And of course, Nigeria is also now being blessed with, I just had a radio interview before your interview, where a similar question had come up. And Nigeria is also blessed with a vast, diverse ethnic makeup. So it's not often always, because now sometimes my kids get confused. Oh, are you Yoruba or are you Igbo or are you Ikwere? Because we go to so many events, they are not able to see that there is a particular tribe. We're all over the place. We go to Ghana events, we go to Senegalese event, we go to Liberian event. So, and all I tell them is the cultures are the same, and they do see that there are some similarities. There may be some unique differences, but at a basic level, the cultural norms are the same. So we don't get too bogged down on the ethnic part of where daddy is from, but they do get to see that that culture is vibrant, that culture has meaning to it, that culture has history behind it, even though, yes, our forefathers did not keep a lot of written documents, but they're still sharing and they're still passing some of those things down to them.
That is awesome, the richness of all of these experiences. But if we move out of the cultural and ethnic Nigeria sphere and move to the work environment, how would you say being Nigerian has worked for you or against you in professional or social settings?
Well, it's good and bad. So I will say that any Nigerian who came to the United States before the 90s would have had it good. And the reason I say that was that at that point, Nigeria's credit worthiness, and I'm not talking money here, I'm talking about reputation, institutional knowledge, and all those things. Nigeria had a very high credibility in the international circles, and this is prior to 1990. So anybody that came prior to that would have received a very receptive, warm, accommodating opportunity just by being a Nigerian. Why? Because academically, they already knew we can perform. Culturally, they already know that we have those values. So when you look at some of all the other indices for which diasporans or for which immigrants are measured, Nigerians check almost all the boxes. But then something happened after the 1990s. And after the 1990s, I believe at that time, the leadership in Nigeria, for some reason, either no longer took serious or do not realize, and I still think Nigeria is suffering from that till today, either they did not realize or they just didn't know that what they do back home affects how we live over here or how people treat us over here. And after the 1990s, there was a significant downward spiral in the credibility of the Nigeria brand. So yes, my very first furniture, right? My apartment, I had a tiny little apartment in Oklahoma, but it was a one-bedroom apartment, very cheap, right? Compared to what we pay now. But I got the furnitures for free just because I was a Nigerian.
Wow.
Not the only one. When I moved to the DMV, I did run into a young lady that at that time used to live in Silver Spring. She's a pharmacist today. Same thing. She got all her furnitures for free because she was Nigerian.
Wow.
And there are several other people who can tell you that story. So, but then after 90, the same thing with jobs. If you go to look for work back then, if you say you're a Nigerian, people know that Nigerians have this very strong work ethic, right? Everybody works 40 hours, Nigerians will do 50, right? Everybody can work regular shift, Nigerians can work overtime. Everybody wants to go home for Easter or for Ramadan, Nigerians can work over and cover the shift. So that's what they know Nigerians to be in the past. And in fact, over the years, you can see that amongst all the African immigrants, Nigeria remains the highest number of immigrants that have come from Africa, second to Ethiopians. So, but from 1990, the moment you say Nigeria, then everybody's like, you know, but to your point, it's been good and it's been bad.
So will that be the reason why there's tension between Nigerians who live abroad and Nigerians who live at home? I'll tell you why I'm saying that. When we rolled out, the Diaspora Dialogue series, somebody said to me, Elia, what are you doing? And I said, oh, we're trying to change the narrative that we're all the same. And then they said to me, well, you should also get the Nigerians abroad to talk about the fact that not everybody in Nigeria is suffering or doing things wrong. You people abroad are very quick to cast aspersions or whatever, highlight bad things that happen in Nigeria and things like that. Is that a genuine divide do you see between Nigerians here and at home? If so, do you have any thoughts on what's causing it and what we can do about it?
Very good question. So the way that I would approach this, and if I was responding to that person, it would be that we need to separate the government of Nigeria from the average Nigerian citizen.
Okay.
And in doing so, what I just spoke about in your previous question becomes very glaring, right? What is hurting the Nigeria reputation? Some people believe that the reputation is being hurt because of Nigerians who live abroad and committing crimes. But then I always beg to differ. Those Nigerians would not have left Nigeria if they had criminal intent. I doubt that that's why they left, right? So the system must have allowed them to pass through for them to be out there. So the answer that I have for that person, and I do happen to interact with a lot of Nigerians, the Nigerians in the corporate world, yes, they're doing fine. And I'm not just talking about the ones that live in Lekki or Banana Island. I'm talking about places like Jos, places like Abuja, places like Port Harcourt, right? Even back in the day, Warri, Benin City, Ibadan, where I was originally born. So you can see that even when you leave those areas and start moving further up north, like Kano, Sokoto, Kaduna, there are very strong, what I consider to be intelligentsia of educated elites. Those people are not Nigeria's problem. Nigeria's problem is one of leadership. Leadership at the federal level, leadership at the state level, leadership at the local government level. So corruption is the least of Nigeria's problem. Now, you may want to make that a completely separate program so we can talk about it. But sometimes people tend to dive into corruption and want to say, oh, that's a no. Anybody that talks to me and says corruption, I look at you as intellectually lazy, because corruption has nothing to do with Nigeria's problem. Nigeria's problem is lack of leadership, effective leadership. Now, leader is not a leader just by title. You can acquire the title all you want. Knowing how to lead is critical. So until we start teaching kids from kindergarten and up the way up to university level what leadership means and how to be an accountable leader and how to be a transformative leader and how to be an effective leader, that problem will continue. So if I'm answering that person, the problem is not the general public, the problem is the leadership.
So there's no need for us, if I'm understanding you correctly, there's no need for us to be pitched against each other. We're not, Nigerians abroad and Nigerians at home. We're not enemies or anything like that. Our concern should be one of the leadership of the country and making sure that we have effective leadership.
Very true. Let me show you a sign. This is what needs to happen between the two sides. Because of lack of leadership, this is what we have.
And so for those who are listening, just listening on the podcast, he's putting his hands together to say unity is what we need to have. And he's putting his hands apart to say what we have is disunity. We're not connected.
Yep, and you need a leader that can bring the glue. The leadership is the glue that brings both sides together. And until both sides come together, I'm afraid Nigeria's development will remain stunted.
Wow, wow. How do we, I know you've sort of made you belong to the Nigerians in Diaspora organization. Is that an attempt? How do you try to make sure that we're getting leadership to understand what's going on? And that will bring me to another question. Actually, I've heard some people say, you guys live abroad, you have no business with what's going on in Nigeria. If you really care, you should come back home. What's your take on that?
Well, let me answer the first part of the question first, and then I'll come back to that second. Both very, very important questions, and actually even genuine or more germane to the Diaspora Dialogue series itself, because that's what I think most people would want to get out of series like this. The first part is dealing with how do you do it? It's not just Nigerians in diaspora. There's so many Nigerian organizations. So I don't think the issue is a lack of the organizations. In fact, I just woke up this morning and found out that a new Yoruba organization was created. I'm like, seriously, we already have so many Yoruba organizations. Why are you guys creating a new one? So there is always a Nigerian group, both at home and here and abroad. What I think is lacking, and this goes back to that leadership thing that I was talking about, is that we do not have true partners on the Nigeria side. I cannot tell you how many times I have gone to Nigeria with the intent of setting up a business.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know, when we go, we don't go with 3 months or 6 months vacation. We go with 2 weeks, maybe, you know, if you're lucky, 4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
So when you reach there and they're frustrating your effort, and you're like, guys, why do I have to kill myself? I am actually trying to bring businesses to you. I'm trying to hire your brothers and your sisters. Why don't I just go across the border to Cameroon? Why don't I go across to Benin or to Ghana, where the process is a lot more simpler? So to register a business in Nigeria takes more than 90 days.
Wow.
Now, somebody told me they've streamlined it. I said, okay, until I see it for myself, I don't know. That same business, and this is true story I'm telling you, that same business took 4 days to register in Ghana.
Oh, wow.
Same business, same profile, same CEO and everything, right? Second thing, they tell us, oh, you guys are in diaspora. How come your kids don't have Nigerian passports? I cannot tell you how many Nigerians have made every effort to get Nigerian passports for their kids. The process to get a Nigerian passport in Nigeria is too exorbitant, unless they are not aware that you live in diaspora, because the moment they find out you live in diaspora, the process is unfundable. But that same process, you go to other countries, Ethiopia, South Africa, you get their passport within 2 weeks. The passport. So that issue is we don't have partnership, right? We have people in Nigeria who claim they're representing diasporans, whether at the federal level or the state level. I hardly ever see them do that bridging of the gap that I just talked about when I put my hands together. So, but coming back to the second part of your question, the second part of your question actually has to do with, if you can remind me again, what was that second part?
So the second part of the question is, should they say, you know, if you really care about Nigeria, you should come back home. If you're living abroad, you know, you really shouldn't be putting your mouth, as it were, in the things that are going on in Nigeria.
Very, very, yeah. So that second part, I beg to differ, right? I beg to differ, and I give very simple examples. I'll give you India as an example. I'll give you South Korea as an example. I'll give you China as an example. An average Chinese that lives in America don't go to China. They don't. But what they do here influences a lot of things that happen in China. So the mistake that is often made in Nigeria, and I suspect that in a way that's the reason we don't have that partnership, is where people see me and I arrive, and in their head, oh, he's going to outshine me, or he's going to overshadow me, or he's bringing his dollar, and his dollar will dwarf my naira. That's not strategy. My Indian friends do when they go to India, and I travel to India a lot myself, is, oh, Dr. Agbeyegbe, you have a program called Diaspora Series. Wow. Come home to India. Let's show you how we can partner you with other diasporans that have returned that are doing very well. That's what a typical Indian would do. They won't shut you down. They won't try to isolate you. They won't try to exclude you. Or sometimes some of the things that I've seen where they even try to belittle you. So we need that level of partnership. Through NIDO, we've made series of proposals over the years, none of which has ever been implemented. The only NIDO implementation that I've ever seen
and for those who don't know, NIDO is Nigerians in Diaspora Organization.
Thank you. Yeah, and the only outcome from all the proposals we've ever proposed was the creation of NIDCOM. But even NIDCOM today, they're even denying that, oh, you guys didn't know how we got created. But we know, those of us who actually wrote the paperwork and did the pushing of the legislation know that we inspired it. Now, we can do more. Every end of July, for the last, since the Obasanjo administration, right? I think it's been at least 20 years since Obasanjo was last in office, right? So every July, Nigeria hosts something called the Diaspora Day. So for the last 20 years or more, diasporans have been coming to Nigeria at their own expense and have been proposing ideas. Find me one person at the federal government level, at the state government level, or the local government level that have implemented anything that anybody has brought from the diaspora. Until Nigeria learns to do that, you will continue to see that dichotomy. Let me give it to you in an example. COVID-19. When COVID hit, everybody, even the United States, was relying on Nigerian doctors and Nigerian nurses. Guess who Nigerian government went to bring? They went to China to bring somebody.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't make sense. Other countries are relying on your own citizens abroad, and you cannot even consult with your own citizens abroad, and yet you want me to come home? Are you serious?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that is such a good example to say, you know, people are saying that Nigerians are the best in this field, and you have the opportunity to engage them. It's like you don't really recognize their resources or their expertise. That is really interesting. Very lovely conversation we're having, Chuks. I have to go here and ask you, is there some long-term plan? Like, you know, people say, you know, I'm just here for whatever, I'm going to retire and go back home. Are you looking at retiring and going back home? Is that a thing? Should that be a thing also?
Well,
I know everybody has to decide for themselves, but
yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I was going to say that, yes, everybody has to make that decision. But the best answer to that question is that even if you want to go back home, my recommendation is to go back fully equipped. Here's why. Those who live abroad tend to forget that while in the United States, maybe Canada and some other developed nations, retirement age is between 60 and 65 or 67. In Nigeria, life actually begins at 60.
Yeah, so Chicks were talking about, you know, Nigerians and not doing this divide, and we're better than them and they're better than us and all of us working together. And you were sharing about, you know, NIDO and NIDCOM and how it's important for us to have strategic partners in Nigeria to make things happen.
Thank you. Yes. So it is important that those of us in diaspora work hard at working with those in Nigeria, whether they were diaspora returnees or those that never left Nigeria. There has to be a partnership. And the glue that will hold that partnership together would be the leadership. And when I say leadership here, I'm still talking about the government, not necessarily the corporations, right? Because if you look at it, the corporate industry has already accepted the diaspora, right? Most of the banks have diaspora desks. Most of the banks have diaspora remittances. Some of the businesses like Shell, the oil company, they have desks that are dedicated to diaspora. So the only place where you see diaspora lacking in terms of partnership, sure, they do talk about diaspora when they speak, but they show it with no action, is the government. And if the government can learn to partner with the diaspora, there are lots of opportunities in Nigeria. Whenever I come, I do see them, but I know that they need to have that partnership in order to work. The second part of your question had to do with retirement. When we retire, do we go back? Are we planning to come back home, or, you know, for those who are going to go back, how should they approach it? So for me, I'm not going back, but the way I want to make sure that everyone understands that it is to each individual to make that choice. But if you choose to go back if you choose to return back home, I would caution that we make every effort in understanding the dynamics in Nigeria. Retirement age in the US and Canada is, you know, between 62 and 67. Yes, Nigeria pretends that that's a retirement age, but that's actually when your life truly starts in Nigeria. So if you look at the people leading, the people ruling, the people doing a lot of things, they're all in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, which means the younger folks can't find work because the older folks are refusing to retire or refusing to vacate. So if you're going to return to Nigeria because you've retired from this side, be mindful that they're not looking at you as a retiree. There's probably nothing for you unless you go back to work or you're ready to go back to work. So unless you're going back with a hefty retirement fund, some of which I encourage people to do while they live here is to build up that nest egg, and be prepared, because when you get home, everybody will be looking to you for handouts, and you need to be prepared for that. But the point that I made earlier that I'm now going back has more to do with that partnership, with that linkage that I talked about. Unless we have partners that are still in the diaspora, being able to bring development to Nigeria will be difficult. So the point that I made previously about COVID, the point that I made about India, Japan, and some of these other countries, they are able to leverage their diaspora because those members of their diaspora live overseas. So what we have not done as diasporans, and what we need to do, and you're slowly beginning to see it, is we need to get diasporans to actually run for office here. So if you notice in the last 2 years, that's been my little pet project. So we're slowly building up that, where we're encouraging Nigerians who live in America to actually run for office here. There's plenty of politicians back home, but if you run for office here, then politician to politician, legislature to legislature, leaders to leaders, we can now work harder at tightening that bridge that I was talking about. So if you take a county like Prince George's County, which is in the DMV, almost 50% of the immigrants that live in Prince George's County are Africans. But when you look at the leadership of who runs that county, they're not there. They're not reflected. If you go to the county executive's office and look at the makeup of her cabinet, and I'm not criticizing her, I'm just showing the reality, similar to the Montgomery County side. They're not there. So what we need to do is to get our diasporans to learn that they need to become part of the American fabric. Because once you now get fully entrenched and fully involved here, then you can, at a political level, challenge the government of Nigeria and say, you need to do X, Y, Z. Why do you think the Israelis still consult America? They consult America because there are things they rely on the Jewish diaspora. Have that opportunity in Nigeria. There's this tendency, oh, you guys are on your own, don't disturb us over here. But whether it be the corruption, whether it be the lack of development, whether it be the lack of institutions, we can drive it here. But first, we need to organize ourselves.
Wow, that's remarkable. So we're advocating for change in the diaspora, but to give us some teeth, integrating into the political system in the diaspora is very helpful for us. And we can't do that if we go back home. Chuks, this has been a very enlightening conversation, learning from the soft things of, bringing up your children differently from how you were brought up, to really learning about coming to America, seeing things a little bit different, in Oklahoma, coming to the DMV area, and working, and how Nigerians were respected before and not so much of being respected nowadays because of the PR of the country, as it were, that has gone down. Before we go, I wanted to say about what are you contributing to the U.S. society that you feel justifies your being here? It's like, I'm here, and this is a significant contribution that we are making here, and this is why I have a right to be here.
Yes, I provide unique services, and the type of services that I provide are universal, so it can be applicable to Nigeria and or any other part of the world if I choose to. I'm a technologist by trade, so I'm into computer technology. So all of your giant telecommunication systems, Verizon's, AT&T, and all of them are my customers. So I provide that unique service to enable them to continue to maintain the technology prowess that the United States wants globally. But other countries can do the same. And the challenge is Nigeria needs to open up, Nigeria needs to liberalize, Nigeria needs to understand that it should not be afraid of its diaspora. Rather, it needs its diaspora in order to tighten and fortify those linkages to help the development spur a little bit more faster.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chuks. It's been very, very interesting talking to you. Before we round up, I'd like to give you the opportunity to say anything that you think is really important to this conversation that we didn't get around to just yet.
I think you've covered it all. I want to commend you and your crew in putting this together and trying to get it off the ground. I think it is very critical that the communication channels between the diaspora and the home, those that are home, be maintained and be maintained in a way where we're not just talking about the nonsensical, right? Let's make it meaningful. Let's make it contributory. I see a lot of things. I was interacting with a group and I told them that the US gives away free money, like that. They said, seriously? I said, yeah, they do. But you have to have the institutions and you have to have the structures in place so that money can come to you, right? So the money cannot come into your back pocket. It has to go into an institution or into a program or into a service. We just think that Nigeria needs some of those monies, but in order to get it, there are things that need to be structured, and let's partner and let's talk so we can make that happen.
Awesome. So let's stop shooting ourselves in the foot, as it were. If we can get support and funding to structured programs, then we need to be talking to ourselves and finding out how we can structure those programs. My name is Lillian Agbeyegbe. You have been listening to the Diaspora Dialogue series with LA. We're talking to members of the diaspora, getting to enrich our multicultural narrative as a world. I mean, some of you may not have known before this conversation that we raise our children differently, different cultures, and makes things work. And it's important to have open channel to work together so that we can benefit not just one side of the country, but the other side. And hey, if somebody says they're not going back home, it's not because they don't think too much of home. It's because people live here now permanently, and there has to be an avenue for Nigerians to be in government so that we're shaping the atmosphere, the political environment, the social environment, the economic environment that our people are living and thriving in here in the United States and other places in the diaspora. Until I come your way next time, thank you for listening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuks. Bye.
Iṣẹ́